Dr. G, welcome back to the podcast. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. It's great to be back here.
Yes, it is. So I want to give listeners just a brief overview of who you are and what we're going to discuss in today's conversation. You're a board certified chiropractic neurologist with over 25 years of experience. You are one of America's leading experts in lifelong optimized living. You have over 800,000 Instagram followers, and you've trained over 1,000 patients and doctors in your program. And so in today's conversation, I want to discuss the benefits of strength training and the importance of having a proper physical movement assessment. The Co-Movement Gym podcast is sponsored by Native Path Supplements, Lombardi Chiropractic, and A Dog's Day Out Doggy Daycare. Mention this podcast or use the promo code in the episode description for a nice discount on us. So to start things off, I'm curious, you had a movement assessment done here at our facility, as you and your son. How was that experience, and what were some things that you took away from that?
You know, there's an old saying, you don't know what you don't know, right? So when it comes to your ability to move, we tend to kind of lock ourselves into what our experience is on a daily basis. And you don't really feel very limited until somebody asks you to do something that you either haven't done in a long time or didn't know that you were unable to do it. So when I came to your place and saw how you were assessing not only my strength and my endurance and just looking at all of those factors associated with fitness, we were looking at the ability to do things, to move a certain way, and the speed at which I could move that way, or for example, if I'm going to be stepping onto a box and then off of a box, sure, if I'm limited, I can adjust it so that I move fast enough to use momentum to create that movement. But then you say, well, you're going to have to do that slower. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden there's a breakdown in the quality of my movement. I would have never known that existed. And knowing what I know about aging and longevity and, you know, those little, at 54 years old, that little breakdown of quality of motion or a lack of strength is revealed. And I know that it's just going to get wider if I don't pay attention to it. So that was the greatest thing about coming to Co-Movement, where I brought my son. At the time, my son, I think, was 18 years old. And, 6'5", kind of has no limitations at all. And then actually seeing he did have limitations and seeing that there were things that he needed to improve, because we're human. We can always improve. My objective is longevity. My son George's objective is, to look great, to function great, to compete in sports. For me, it's just a matter of, okay, I'm 54. I have a trajectory. I want to get to whatever, 94, 104, with the ability to do certain things. Our objectives are different. We all, as humans, have limitations. Revealing those limitations and seeing how they can improve was the most important thing. Now, after having that assessment with you guys at Co-Movement, then I had to put into practice what you were telling me to do in order to fix that. And that's where the real work is, right? The real work is taking something that you're not very good at and getting better at it. And that's not fun always, right? It's not fun to go into your limitations and be frustrated by your balance, or to be frustrated by your lack of strength in certain movements or lack of range of motion. And then the reward comes when you see it improve. So that was my experience. And again, observing my son, again, whose goals and objectives are far different from mine. But knowing that we always have to set goals and then try to achieve them.
Yeah. And you know, like you said, everyone has limitations, whether you're an Olympic athlete or, you're 75 years old and have never exercised. And that assessment piece allows us to put people through like a controlled ranges of motion. And like you just said a few minutes ago, when you slow things down and we isolate things, we're able to see, muscular imbalances, prior injuries pop up, so on and so forth. One of the things I've witnessed over the last 14 years of doing assessments is the vast majority of people overestimate their abilities going into an assessment. And then within minutes, or at least by the end of an assessment, a lot of times is quite humbling. Obviously in a professional way, we're not, toasting people with an assessment, but we as humans gravitate to things we do best. And then we tell ourselves like the narrative of I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. But what we're not realizing is we're ignoring, weak spots. And a professional assessment points those out, but then not only points those out, it gives the coach the ability to write a program to help fix those, and like you said, as we age, those weak spots get worse. And so unless they're identified, it's generally a downhill run with those patterns. So
you cut out there a little bit. You cut out there a little bit, Josh. I wasn't sure if there was a question at the end of that.
No, not at all. There was a good observation, on your part with the assessment piece. So I want to get into now why everyone should have a physical movement assessment. Like we've talked about blood work, we've talked about, VO2 max testing, body composition. So we've got a lot of metrics going here, but a movement assessment, in your opinion, what are some of the top reasons someone should have an assessment done by a professional?
Well, I did spend a portion of my career, again, my background in neurology, I was working with a lot of people who are suffering from the long-term effects of concussion. And I learned a lot about movement and because of the relationship between the nervous system and the body is so intimate, and that a concussion actually disrupts that. And I was working with a lot of athletes. These were mostly sports concussion. So athletes, both collegiate and professional. And what was most interesting, especially, are the retired professional athletes that we would work with. And what we saw was, athletes are really amazing at cheating. They are the best at cheating. Matter of fact, they're winners because their ability to shortcut their way to winning is so remarkable. And when somebody is later in their career or retired or having experienced injury, well, they get better and better at taking a shortcut. And what I saw in that population is the ability to cheat. And therefore, you ask them to do something, they're going to do it. And they're going to do it in their mind better than anybody else. And they're probably right because they're incredibly gifted. But they have gaps in their movement that results in further injury as they get older. So what I mean by that is if your nervous system is compromised and it affects your quality of movement, and then you use your natural gifts to make up for that, then that weakness, if never addressed, the gap is going to widen and widen and widen. And now you have imbalances in your system that are so significant that it can cause your joints, knees, shoulders, hips, etc., to degenerate way faster than the general public. So that's why you see a lot of retired hockey players and football players and baseball players getting these very aggressive surgeries very young in life, whether it be shoulder replacements, knee replacements, hip replacements, where sometimes multiple joints at the same time. And so that is again, I don't know if I'm answering your question fully there, but that was in my career where I saw a lot of this kind of deficit, resulting in long-term problems with longevity.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think of myself when you bring that up, Dr. G. So when I started working with Ido Portal from a movement and coaching perspective, I was coming from a higher level CrossFit background, and I was really good with certain patterns. And then I started working with Ido, and it was a complete eye opener in terms of the number of things I could not do. And, basic things like extend my thoracic spine and, do pistol squats. And, there was a lot of things that my musculature was covering up. And Ido, I remember doing the assessment video and having to send it over to him, and I was embarrassed. I felt like a kindergartner trying to learn new things. And that was probably the number one realization with me. It was how good I was, exactly what you had said, like covering up certain things with things I am good at from a strength perspective. But an assessment such as what Ido Portal put me through opened my eyes to all the other realms in terms of movement and patterns. And so, yeah, that was a huge piece for me. I kept that assessment video on my computer as a humbling piece for me.
What I love about what you do, and of course what you learned from Ido Portal, is it's movements that virtually no human should be good at right out of the gate, right? So I know there's a lot of these just movements that require such incredible control, and we learn a lot from it, because we all, no matter what our degree, I don't care if you're 80 plus years old or if you're a young buck, it doesn't matter. We are terrible at doing certain things, and it's a really good practice to identify what we're terrible at and improve upon it. Because again, what I know about the human nervous system, and again, I can't stress this enough, your nervous system is the master system. It's the system that controls all of the other systems in the body. The nervous system controls breathing, it controls blood pressure, digestion, all the things we've talked about on previous podcasts. But the nervous system needs information. That information comes from your physical environment. And that is dependent on the communication from receptors. So if I could get technical for just a second, I think your audience would appreciate this, because ultimately, they say we only use 10% of our brain, or some kind of crazy statistic like that. Well, that's not true. 90% of your brain's function is to handle things you never even have to think about, whether it be breathing, digestion, blood pressure, all the things that are, automatic, or what we call autonomic. But the brain is sitting in a closed case with no light, right? Your skull doesn't let any light in, doesn't let any sound in. It's floating in a fluid. There's no real gravitational impact on the brain. The brain doesn't sense anything, right? It doesn't even have sensory receptors. Like there's no pain receptors on the brain. They can operate on your brain without using anesthesia, because your brain doesn't feel anything. So how does your brain get information about temperature, about position, about movement, about speed, about all the things going on around us? It does so through our senses. And the overwhelming majority of that comes from our muscles and joints. Our muscles and joints take information from gravity, movement, all the information from pressure that's coming from our feet, from our ankles, from our spine, from our inner ear mechanism, from our eyes, taking that information and processing it. So the ability for you to do that in novel, new ways is going to allow for your brain to expand its abilities. So when you're a child, this happens very rapidly and very aggressively as you develop into an adult. And then you start to get into your more advanced years, and your daily activities tend to be the same activities every day. And our nervous system starts to pare down what it's capable of. So a perfect example of this is skipping. Every kid learns how to skip. Every kid learns how to skip. Go ahead and ask somebody 50 plus years old if they can skip, and you're going to see some really bizarre movements. And people are quite shocked. Like, skipping is something that's so easy. I used to do it so much when I was a kid. And now at 45, 50, 55, 60 years old, you cannot do that. That is a breakdown in your nervous system function. Something that needs, constant activity or reinforcement as you get older, because if you don't use it, you lose it. So the ability to skip, the ability to do certain things, the ability to climb, the ability to get off of the floor, right? There are great cultures around the world. We have family that are Persian, and their dinner table is on the floor. They eat on the floor, and that's everyone, grandmothers, grandfathers. How many grandmothers and grandfathers in their 70s and 80s can you have sit down for dinner with pillows on the floor, eat dinner, and then get up and take your dishes to the sink? Not many, right? We all kind of just sit in chairs. And if you sit in a chair for enough years, your ability to sit on the floor is massively compromised. And that brings to light how important it is to be able to do these movements. Squatting. People say, well, what's an exercise that I can do? If I have no time to do any exercise whatsoever, what can I do? Well, squatting is one of the most important things for the elderly to do, right? Because you're always going to have to get off of a toilet seat. You're always going to have to sit down and get up from your vehicle or a vehicle. So the ability to squat is something you want to to go into a squat and to come out of a squat is something every senior citizen should be working on every single day. Because if you don't, you're going to lose it.
Mm-hmm. So Ido Portal would always say to us that we start aging because we stop playing. And, kids exercise while they play. But adults, they start sitting on the sidelines and they don't play. And so the new patterns that come up through playing, adults ignore that. And, their pathways of movement become smaller and smaller over time. Native Path has been a podcast sponsor of ours since day one. And it's because our clients feel amazing using their supplements. While a lot of products on the market today contain useless fillers and incorrect dosages, Native Path holds to a higher standard. Native Path's ingredients are sourced from only the highest quality, properly combined nutrients, all while being offered at competitive prices. Use code COMO15, that's COMO15 at checkout, and receive 15% off each order. Lombardi Chiropractic has been Co-Movement's trusted chiropractor for the last 14 years. They have worked with hundreds of our clients, and I can confidently say they have the most knowledgeable and holistic approach to care that I have ever seen. Whether you suffer from migraines, low energy, nagging pain, or just simply want to improve your overall health, I highly recommend contacting the team at Lombardi Chiropractic. Mention the Co-Movement Gym podcast and receive 50% off your initial consultation and x-rays. Here at Co-Movement, we put a lot of energy into helping you become happy, healthy, and strong. But we're not the only ones needing a good workout. That's why a dog's day out is the best place in Central New York for your pet to spend their day. Your dog will be as happy and healthy as you when you let them run, play, and socialize instead of just sitting on the couch waiting for you to come home. Give your dog the active day out that they deserve. Mention this podcast and get a free day of doggy daycare at a dog's day out. So I want to go over a few more things here in terms of the benefits of obtaining a movement assessment. A lot of people are unaware of imbalances from left to right, like right arm, right leg, left leg, in their hips, their shoulders. People come in thinking they're okay. And then, we have them hang or we have them do lunges or something. And I'm amazed at the number of people that have compensated over the years and have created huge imbalances from right to left. And then another thing I want to talk about is it gives a coach a baseline to test against. So if we know where a client is starting, let's say they can do 3 push-ups and they can't do a chin-up day 1. But 2 months into their program, they can do 6 push-ups and 1 chin-up, they're improving. If they can balance on their left leg for 20 seconds and by, 2 months in, they can do 30 seconds, they're improving. But unless you have concrete data, you can't tell if the training program is actually working. And so we see a lot of coaches jump in day 1 with their clients and they just give them a random workout. But first off, the workout isn't necessarily tailored to their abilities because you don't know their abilities. And then second off, you have nothing that you are testing against because you don't know where you started. And so the joy is in doing an assessment on all clients, which here at Cold Movement, everyone gets an assessment. No matter how fit you are, you get an assessment. We have an idea of where you're starting. And, over time, we can look back 2-3 years. We do this all the time here. 2-3 years, a client's with us. We look back and say, do you remember when you couldn't do X, Y, Z? And, now they're able to do it. So I always like to throw that in there. And then another area here is setting obtainable goals. And so a quick story, we had a client come in years ago and he had saw me do a handstand push-up freestanding on YouTube. And he comes in and he says, my goal is to do a handstand push-up like you that I saw the video of. And my first question, just knowing a little bit about, his physical capabilities is, can you do a perfect push-up on the floor, like a standard military push-up? And he had said, they're sort of hard, but, I can do a few. Well, professionally, we reorient people, right, in their goals based on their physical current capabilities. That's a huge piece because, like I said in the beginning, a lot of people's expectations and realities that they live in are much higher than really where they are. And so with this client, instead of saying as like an immature coach, like, yes, we're going to get you a freestanding handstand push-up, which took me like 5 years of insane dedication and thousands of hours. I said, let's work on doing a set of 5 perfect floor push-ups, right? And so like you and I both know, we progress from there, right? Maybe we get into dips and then we get into wall handstand holds and so on and so forth. There's such a journey to doing some of these advanced movements that most people have no idea. So, but with an assessment, we get to see where our client is. And if they come in with goals that aren't accurate, we can reestablish those goals with time. And another thing I want to throw in here, this is sort of long-winded, but this is very important, is you had mentioned that no matter your age, you can improve and you can develop new, pathways, movement patterns, and so forth. So for people listening that know what I do now at 41 with some of my exercises and whatnot, at age 33, I was barely able to hold a wall handstand, so a chest to wall handstand. So my feet are supported against a wall and I'm in a good alignment posture and structure with that. I could barely do that. 2 years later of training consistently and with a lot of dedication, I was holding a freestanding handstand in the middle of the room for 1 minute. And then that went on to doing press handstands and, more and more advanced movements over time. And so this was at 33, which is where generally capabilities start to slowly decline. And now at 41, I can do many, many more exercises and more patterns than I was at age 33 because I trained them and I worked on them over time. And so I wanted to throw that out, Dr. G. So any thoughts on that?
Oh my goodness, a lot of thoughts come to mind, because it's so important to understand that motion is so reliant on the nervous system, and the nervous system, again, things we don't really think too much about as it relates to knowing your nervous system, understanding your exact position in space. In order for you to maintain your balance. Doing a handstand push-up certainly requires a tremendous awareness of exactly where each part of your body is in space. Not a conscious awareness. Your nervous system just has to be that finely tuned. And if you don't do that, well, it's not finely tuned for that activity. You have to tune it. And that tuning, like you said, takes time. I learned this in the world of competitive sports and concussion because there was a great study that came out some years ago that said that if you had a concussion, that your risk of having an ACL tear in your knee increased by 400%.
Wow.
Right? So here you have an athlete was concussed, had recovered, got cleared to come back into play. They appeared to be in full, perfect physical condition. There's no symptoms whatsoever, yet their risk for ACL tear in the next 24 months is 400% higher.
Wow.
So why would that be the case? Well, that's usually the case because the assessment as to whether or not somebody can get back on the field after a concussion is typically done in a gym or therapeutic environment. So doctors and physical therapists and trainers will make sure that the person can move the way they're designed to. But at game time, there's a big difference. At game time, just imagine you're a wide receiver, you're running full speed, running a pattern, timing when the ball is being thrown, and being able to reach up and grab it and catch it with one hand and come down perfectly. Your body has to be so tuned into position and space that when you suffer an injury like a concussion, just that being off so very slightly will cause your body to come down on that leg in a way that's just slightly off of what it would have been without the injury. And now you set a moment of dislocation and you tear the ligament. Somebody in the real world, in our world, in the office worker world or the weekend warrior world or the gym rat world, they'll never know that they have that limitation. But you put them on a field of professional performance, whether it be hockey,
Yes.
soccer, football, tennis, it doesn't matter. You're asking that nervous system to perform with perfection. And because of the injury, it does not. And therefore, when we prescribe improvements, it's very difficult for a trainer, physical therapist, medical doctor to give that athlete what they need in order to measure that off of the, in a training environment, in a safer environment. Okay, so then what do you do about it? I got to work with some very talented people who would assess the athletes before the season, before the injury, so to speak, right? So what are the assessments? The assessments are assessments that include all of the movement patterns that we're talking about here, but also looking at it from a neurological perspective. So looking at how their eyes move with their body, right? Because your eyes, your inner ear, and your body have to, I always say, your balance sits on a three-legged stool. each leg of the stool. The one leg is your vestibular system, or the fluid in your inner ear that tells you exactly where you are in space as far as tilt, rotation, etc. Also your eyes, right? Your eyes need to know where the horizon is. And then, of course, there's your muscles and joints giving you feedback of exactly where you are in space. All three of those systems have to be working perfectly. The brain injury or concussion damages the vestibular system on virtually every single athlete that's ever been concussed. That's the one system you could say, the vestibular system, that's damaged with every concussion, or that experiences stress with every concussion. So looking at those three systems is super, super important. Now, again, I'm talking about this in the context of a concussion, but this is relevant to an aging nervous system. This is relevant to anyone and everyone who has, over time, any kind of loss of function. So one of the things the movement specialists and the trainers that I worked with would do is, in the preseason, they would videotape their ability to do Olympic lifts. See, an Olympic lift is an incredibly important measure, because an Olympic lift requires you to have strength, speed, balance, right? And all of that has to be with incredible precision.
Yep.
So the range of motion of your joints, shoulders, hips, dorsiflexion of your foot has to be spot on. Your speed and strength have to be tuned in a way that allows you to go through that full motion. If you think about how neurologically active an Olympic lift is, because this is not an easy movement to do. When you watch it, it happens so fast. It kind of looks simple, but it's incredibly complex. So when the injury would happen during the season, the final measure as to whether or not that person should get back on the field was their ability to do the Olympic lifts.
Oh, wow.
In a way that was consistent with what they were able to do prior to the injury. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just clearance from the neurologist. It wasn't just clearance from the physical therapist. It wasn't just, asking the athlete how they feel, that they don't have any symptoms. It was this incredibly important movement that involved the entire body, with incredible energy expenditure, with incredible precision, speed, flexibility. And that told us that their nervous system was fine-tuned enough. And again, we had other methods, but that was one of the major ones that we thought was super helpful in getting athletes back in action.
That's cool. So yeah, they had to test and retest the Olympic lifts to see if they were ready to go. I've never heard of that, but that's genius. And everything you said about the Olympic lifts is spot on. I've done them since ninth grade when I competed in the Empire State Games. And yeah, they're the two hardest lifts on the planet. So for listeners that don't know what they are, it's the snatch and the clean and jerk. You can't fake those movements. You can't cheat. You can either perform the movements or you can't. And, the barbell will win, if you're not strong enough to perform the movement correctly. So that's cool that they're doing that in the rehab setting there. Okay, great. So let's wrap up the assessment piece here, Dr. G. So one thing I want to get out to listeners is for the general population, a physical movement assessment is not going to be testing maximal effort. So if you're 45 and unfit and you're scared to come in and have an assessment done because you're going to be doing, burpees and max bench press and max deadlifts and blowing your back out, that's not the case, at least in our facility. And so the point of it is to get an idea of where we stand, right? And so when people think about an assessment, and I have to say this literally in every consultation, there is no good and bad, right? So there's not like you're going to perform poorly on a movement and we're like, man, that really sucked. There is no good or bad, because as we know by now in this conversation, we all have holes in our armor that need to be worked on and weaknesses. And so there's no good and bad, and there's no maximal effort in terms of potential injury, right? The fitter you get, the more we can ramp up that intensity. If you come to us, you're a college athlete, right? And you want to increase your deadlift 30 pounds, right? We're going to be having to do more intense things, right? But for most of the general population, I'm saying like 90 to 95%, don't be scared about going into an assessment. So, what do we go over in an assessment? I just want to list off some things here. So we test movement patterns. So can you do an air squat? Can you squat to a box? Can you squat without a box? Can you do lunges? How long can you hang for? What does it look like when you put your arms straight overhead? Can you extend your thoracic spine? Can you sit in a pancake, a straddle pancake? Can you perform a straddle up or a diagonal stretch? Like, there's so many things that we go through over the course of an hour, and you and your son experience this, that it really gives us a very clear idea without throwing a ton of weight on a bar and asking you to lift it. And lastly, with an assessment, is a proper assessment builds confidence in clients. And so if you do it correctly, you can point out weaknesses, but then doable solutions to the weakness. And so it provides hope that your back has been hurting you, and you come in and we perform a hinging movement and it hurts. We can give you solutions and, ways to fix that. So it's a very optimistic piece there. And then we link people's values in their life to the assessment results. So what do I mean by that? A quick story here. So we had a professor come in. He was a best-selling author. So he writes a lot, like upwards of 4 hours a day. But when he was sitting for long periods of time, his back would hurt. So he calls us. And I remember on the phone call, he calls and he says, I'm not a gym rat. I don't like exercise, but my back is effing killing me. I want you to help me, get my back to feel better. So we linked, learning to deadlift and hinge correctly and strengthening his core to the things that he loves most in life, which was writing. And writing required him to sit for long periods of time. And so we can link that with literally every client that comes through our doors. So do you want to add anything to that, Dr. G?
Yeah, I mean, my experience coming to co-movement was phenomenal, because there was, I had told you I have a history of 3 knee operations, 1 ACL reconstruction, 2 meniscus surgeries on both knees. I have a history of shoulder dislocation. I have a history of a lumbar spinal herniated disc, as well as an incredible amount of degenerative changes that have occurred over the years in my spine. And so I walked into your facility with all of my limitations, so to speak, and my perceived limitations, right? Like what I believed to be true, because of, again, not only my history, but also the things that I could and I thought that I could not do. Now, coming into co-movement, you were able to do these assessments with me. And I really want to stress the importance, like when you say a push-up, okay, most people can kind of get into a push-up and do it semi-properly. But then you said, well, let's do a 3-second count on the way down, get to the bottom, hold it for 2 seconds, and then explode up. So that was the tempo idea. And here I was so proud of myself that I could do 50 push-ups. And then you asked me to do the tempo push-ups in a very strict fashion. And I'm really having a hard time doing 6. And that is important because, again, it allows my nervous system to learn something new, that novelty, and it prevents me from just blowing past all of the constraints of poor quality of motion, of poor strength, of poor, when we tend to do things fast, we're compensating, we're cheating, right? We're doing what the athletes do. We're cheating our way through. And a proper assessment doesn't allow you to cheat your way through, forces you to work through and improve, in those areas. So that is so important in the things that I want to be able to do. So I'm no longer wanting to be stronger than my friends or competing in sports or anything like that. But I would like to remain strong. I would like to hold on to my muscle. And if I'm exercising in a way into my 50s and 60s and 70s that allows me to preserve my muscle, but my movement quality is so poor, well, then I'm setting myself up for injury. And my number one value over the age of 50 is, when it comes to fitness, is don't get hurt. It's my number one value, because when you get hurt over the age of 50, you spend more and more time unable to do the things that would prevent you from getting weaker and degenerating, and of course, aging. Mm-hmm. So again, what are your goals? That client of yours whose primary goal is to be able to sit and write because that's how he follows his passion and makes his living. You also, the human body was not designed to sit 40, 50 hours a week in a chair. So training that person to be able to do that activity becomes the primary goal, so they can do it in a way that doesn't force them to pay for it later, if that makes sense. So that's kind of my interpretation of that. So identifying your clients or my patients and identifying what the goals are, what the longevity pursuit is, and then designing a program that's going to allow that person to continue to do what they value the most.
Yes. I like all of that, Dr. G.
If I could, Josh, if I could just take a second to expand on the experience I had just in the last week or two. My family and I went on a vacation to Greece, and we went to Crete, which is an incredible place with regards to its natural beauty and what it offers. And there was a gorge there that starts at 6,000 feet, and you walk 13 kilometers downhill and basically climbing down rocks into dried riverbeds and ancient villages. Really remarkable place, Samaria Gorge in Hania, Crete. And this was a 13-kilometer, 6-hour hike downhill. So everybody's like, oh, thank God it's downhill. But I would much prefer going uphill, just making sure I have enough water, to go uphill, because going uphill is just so much easier. So here I was with my Vivo barefoot athletic shoes and doing a 13-kilometer downhill hike that required an eccentric contraction, right? So think about concentric contraction is climbing up the stairs, and eccentric contraction is your leg muscles gently allowing you to get down the steps. And I say gently because you want smooth quality of strong motion. As we get older, our ability to have good eccentric contraction of a muscle is compromised, and we tend to drop down the stairs rather than climb down the stairs. So climbing down the stairs is a more controlled, precise movement. Dropping down the stairs is saying my quadriceps or my leg muscles are so weak that it can't carry my body weight. I'm just going to drop down onto my foot. This is why most injuries in mountaineering, but also among the elderly, is going downstairs or climbing downhill. not on the way. 85% of mountaineering injuries happen on the way down, not on the way up. And I was focusing this entire hike on taking each step in a precise fashion, going down and not dropping and skipping the way my muscles wanted to, especially when they started to fatigue. So I did that, and I was very proud of myself. I can't tell you how sore I was for the next 3 days. It was my quadriceps and my calves and the muscles in my feet were screaming. But at least I knew that they got a great workout. So now, how does this translate? Well, it translates quite a bit, right? Like when you design a training program for somebody who's, concerned about their ability to go up and down stairs later in life, well, then you want to practice that, right? You want to train that eccentric contraction. And most of us really just pay attention to the concentric contraction, the explosive movement up, like on a bench press or squatting, which is the going up, but it's really the way down and how controlled and precise you can be that will set you up for good function into your older years.
What you're describing, I wanted to bring this up and I had forgot, but you just reminded me, is what we call time under tension. So there's not a lot of coaches, well, I'll say generalized personal trainers, like true professionals are training time under tension with their clients. And so what do I mean by that? When we write as coaches an exercise, a lot of times it'll be accompanied with 4 numbers. So let's say 3010. So 3 seconds is the time spent in the eccentric, that's moving down in any movement, lowering in a chin up, lowering in a squat, lowering in a deadlift. Think gravity's pulling you down. So you would spend 3 seconds going down. 0, so we said 3010. So the second number, the 0, would be the time spent at the bottom. So you're going to spend no time at the bottom in this specific instance. And then you're going to spend 1 second going up, rising to the top, standing in a squat, pulling the weight off the ground in a deadlift, pulling yourself to the top of a chin up. And then the 0 at the end, the 4th digit, is the time spent at the top of a movement. Okay. So this is what you're describing, is time under tension. And a lot of people, kids too, the kids are famous for this, not just really everyone is, but they want to move fast through the downward phase. That's the eccentric phase, or what you said is moving downhill. And then they want to move fast in the upward phase, or the concentric. Where true strength, and this is like the real freaky level strength with all athletes, is in the eccentric. When you can build tons of strength with stability and patterns, holding weight or specific, lowering into a press handstand or a tuck planche slowly. That eccentric is where the gold is at. And it's also nice is with time under tension is there's less injury. So if you're performing a movement with, let's say 4 seconds lowering down into a squat, the bottom position, 4 seconds at the bottom, stand for 4 seconds, and then chill out at the top, shaking your legs out for 4. That's 1 rep. So for people listening, try 5 reps of that today with no weight. 4 seconds down, 4 seconds in the hole, 4 seconds up, 4 seconds chilling at the top. Try 5 reps of that in a row. And so the time under tension is gold. And what you're describing with the downhill piece and the controlling the movement, that's exactly, what proper programming would do.
That was a great explanation. And I took that all of that to say what you said, but I learnred that from you. And I didn't understand that before, or I didn't pay attention to it before, whatever the case was. And, I was trying to describe that also with the push-ups, right? The 3 seconds down, the explosive, the 2 second hold, and then the explosiveness on the way up. That is a game changer. That is a game changer. And again, I think for everyone, but certainly at this point in my life, nothing has improved my movement ability, my stability, my balance. Nothing has improved any of that more than using those tempos, because you would write my program and
Yep.
you would put those numbers there. And again, doing the activity, if the numbers weren't there, I would do it and just kind of just get through the workout like I always did my whole life. Adding that time under tension tempo to almost all of the exercises that you wrote for me made the workout so much, first of all, so much more interesting.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like boring. It's interesting. It's you're constantly evaluating, getting feedback on yourself. It makes the workout far more enjoyable, but it also allows you to see improvement. Again, as opposed to just going to the gym for the sake of going to the gym. You're going to the gym for the sake of improving function, and seeing it happen in real time is truly remarkable. That was really one of the greatest benefits I got from coming to Co-Movement and working with you, because it was not only adding that component, but also the actual exercises and movements that I was doing are not exercises or movements that I would have thought to do on my own.
Yeah. So, for our listeners, you and I know that by mid-30s, peak strength will start to decline slowly, right? So you're going to pull your max deadlift, max squat, bench press by mid-30s. And again, this is generalized, but generally that's the case. So let's take someone that is, say, in their mid-40s, and they're doing the same routine since high school: bench, squat, deadlift, press, and their numbers have decreased over time. What I want this person to do is to work with a tempo of 3 seconds down, take the same exercises, okay? 3 seconds down, 3 at the bottom, explode out of the hole. So on the concentric on the way up, go fast, and then 1 second at the top. So 3, 3, X, 1. And then do your same exercises and do 5 reps of your exercises with that tempo. Do that for 6 weeks and go back to the tempo that you were doing, which was probably like 10x1 because everyone moves really fast, and see if the strength changes. We have seen dramatic increases in people's strength over the years, well into their 50s and 60s, just simply slowing the movement down. And then they go back and they say, oh my gosh, I haven't pulled those weights in 10 or 15 years. It's because it's a new stimulus, and you need a new stimulus to get stronger over time.
That's the idea of novelty, right? You need a new stimulus. The nervous system needs to do something fairly new in order to create new connections. And ultimately, that's what youth is, right? The ability to adapt to a changing environment is youthful. I don't care how old you are. We have the same mechanism in order to have novel experiences. We just have to put ourselves into a situation where we're having novel or new experiences. And the research shows we gain strength the same way throughout our lives. If you want to start a routine at 90, you will gain your strength, flexibility, and movement quality in the very same way you did when you were 30. It's just going to be at a different rate or a different ability. But as long as you're alive, you can improve. End of story. So there is no limit to the age in which you can see improvements. And again, if all you can do is climb 10 stairs, and you're, let's just say 80 years old, but you're able to climb 10, well, then you can train to get to 12, and you can train to get to 15. You can always improve, and the way in which we improve remains the same. The limitations only occur once you've degenerated to the point where the limitation is of matter, right? The two bones are fused, then they're not going to unfuse. But if that's not the case, you can always have measurable improvement.
What is let's spend now the next 15 minutes or so talking about strength training. We've sort of blended the two. So I want to give our listeners some patterns and or exercises to walk away from this conversation. But first I want to start with you explaining briefly what sarcopenia is.
Sure. A sarcomere, the word sarco really refers to muscle. So penia, like osteopenia, less bone, less muscle, right? Sarcopenia is the loss of muscle. Now, muscle is what we spent the first third of our life developing in the most rapid fashion because of genetics and hormones and food, et cetera. And then, what does that muscle do? Well, that muscle does a lot of things. That muscle provides that neurological feedback that we're talking about to the brain and central nervous system. So the more abundant your muscle or the more robust your muscles are, the more feedback your nervous system gets from its environment and the more fine-tuned your nervous system can be. If you have less muscle, then you start losing that fine-tuning of your central nervous system. So that's a neurological component. Then there's it's kind of a structural component of muscle, right? Mm-hmm. Think about it. It's your armor, right? It's your protector. If somebody, if I fall down a flight of stairs and I hit my shoulder and my chest and my hip, there's muscle there to cushion and protect me. It's kind of like an armor that if it weren't there and I fell on my shoulder or I fell on my hip and that ass muscle is far smaller than it once was, well, then I have less protection. I'm far more prone to an orthopedic injury, let's just say a fracture. And then there's the metabolic aspect of your muscle, which is probably the most important for most people. Metabolic means it's very energy expensive to own muscle. There's a lot of rent that you pay for that real estate. And the more you have, the better you can process the food that you eat in a way that doesn't harm you. So for example, the younger you are, the more muscle you have, the less likely you are to become insulin resistant, pre-diabetic, and diabetic, because your muscle is able to utilize the energy that you get from your food. So muscle will protect you from everything associated with obesity, type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, insulin resistance, etc. It's going to provide your nervous system with all the feedback that it needs to maintain that high level of connection, to tell you where you are in space, to better control your joints so that your movement can be full and complete. And it's also going to provide you with that protection. So sarcopenia means you're going to lose muscle and lose all of that. And losing all of that is unacceptable, because that, by definition, is degenerative disease that some people will call aging, right? I don't think aging is a disease, so to speak, but if it's happening more rapidly than it should, well, then it can be considered a disease. So aging is not a disease, but the speed at which you age can be disease-like. And I believe that if we're losing muscle at a rate that is far faster than would be the case if you were doing something about it, well, then that is going to result in high risk for everything, from higher blood pressure to cholesterol issues to prediabetes and diabetes to Alzheimer's. Again, if your nervous system is getting less information, that means your brain and nervous system are going to atrophy as well. You'll have brainopenia, right? So you have osteopenia, sarcopenia, and I'm going to make a new word, call it brainopenia, right? So neuropenia, the ability for your nervous system to communicate just becomes less and less and less. And then we have our degenerative decline over time. Okay, so what do we do to prevent all of that? the best thing you can do is hold on to your muscle.
Yep.
How do you hold on to your muscle? All the things we're talking about here, as far as quality of movement, strength, etc., and making sure you give your body the substrate it needs to make new muscle cells. And that comes from protein in our diet.
I like that. Brainopenia. You got to make a t-shirt of that, Dr. G. I'll buy
Just
that.
made that up now.
I like it. I like it a lot. Yeah. So a few statistics here. It says by 80 years old, we can have up to 50% decrease in overall muscle mass. And then it says sarcopenia can start as early as 30 years old in people that aren't training properly. And so for those of you that were the big high school athletes and you still think you got it and you're 30 or 40 and you haven't done shit, I can tell you that you are losing muscle and most likely probably gaining fat. And so you need to strength train. You had mentioned the importance of armor. And I want to just, again, tell a quick story here. I do some trail running, nothing super advanced, but I was running a few weeks ago and I was on mile 7 out of 10. And thankfully it was a zone 2 heart rate. So I'm running at like a 10:15 to 11-minute mile, which is not fast. But I was getting tired. And I stubbed my left toe on a very small rock, maybe a 2-inch rock sticking up off the ground. My legs were getting heavy. I was getting tired 7 miles in. And I was also listening to a podcast. My brain, was in space and I'm looking forward and not down. Right. And I Supermaned, like full out launched, and I landed hard. And I remember in midair, this is obviously I was in midair for like a quarter second. Obviously it felt like forever. I remember telling my brain telling me to go limp, like soften up. And I landed on my palms, my elbows, my chest, my thighs, and my knees. And I'm laying down. It was actually a railroad bed. It didn't have the railroad ties, but it had that black like soot. And I'm laying there. And like when something like that quickly happens, you assess quick, like, oh shit, like, okay, I'm alive. I'm breathing. Nothing seems to hurt. What's wrong? Okay, maybe I'm good to go. So I stood up, and after it felt like 15 seconds, it was probably 3. And I stood up and I looked down and both my knees were bleeding. And I was like, okay, like whatever. And I like remember just like shaking my body and my legs and my hips and like my neck and like I was fine. And I ran 3 more miles and I was, other than some scabs on my knees, I was 100% fine. And I told Andy, our trainer here, that I can't remember the last time that I felt like that, and I'm very active. And I don't attribute that to anything other than I tripped and fell. But I was very, very thankful that I had muscle and some armor to protect me from not blowing my knee out or my shoulder or, smashing my face on the ground. I had enough extensor muscles to not clip my chin, my teeth, or my face in that on the ground. And I walked away with 2 scabs on my knees and still a pretty damn good run. So I was very, very grateful. So when you had brought that up, Dr. G, about the armor there, that is absolutely true.
Yeah. Now take that armor conversation, right? So you had the armor there, but what you also described is you had no sarcopenia to worry about. And you didn't have the osteopenia, right? Because they go together. The osteopenia is not a loss of calcium, or osteoporosis is not a loss of calcium. This is very important for women, especially because one of the top storehouses of protein that we have in our body is our bone, collagen protein, and that's the lattice work in which the calcium sits. And if the bones atrophy, the protein in the bone, the lattice work that is the collagen protein, starts to disappear, and there's nothing for the calcium to stick on. So you could take all the calcium you want. It has nowhere to go, right? So you're just going to pee it out. But it's the action of muscles pulling on bones that tell the bones to stay thick, to deposit more collagen, to prevent that bone from getting thinner, right? So sarcopenia, osteopenia kind of go hand in hand. But if those two have integrity, then you're protecting your brain, because it's ultimately the joints, ligaments, tendons, and muscles that have receptors. A receptor is, just imagine, when you're backing your car up, if it's a new car, you have these sensors that tell you you're getting closer and closer to the car behind you. Those are receptors. Those are sensors. We have those. And those are sitting in our ligaments, tendons, bones, and our muscle, telling our nervous system about the world around us. And therefore, you had the neurological integrity to protect your face, to have that extensor response. These are neurological reflexes that you developed as a child, and that you should be holding on to throughout your life, so that when you fall down, you have a extensor response of your arms and your wrists, and you pull your head and your neck back, and you have these protective reflexes. That, have you ever seen an elderly person fall? Unfortunately, I've been there, and to watch them actually fall and land on their face, not because of any reason other than they did not have an extensor response. How do you know, like, how do you let that happen? And the way you prevent it from happening is by holding on to your muscle, holding on to your bone, having that metabolic integrity. Because again, if your muscles get, I think you said 50% loss in, a certain period of time, well, that's the tissue that you need to process the food and the carbohydrates that you're eating. So if you're eating the same kind of amount of food as you were when you had 50% more muscle, well, now you have metabolic disease, right? You have prediabetes or insulin resistance, and you're accumulating fat and losing muscle. And all of those things kind of work hand in hand in degenerating. So the challenge, so you can tell that story of what happened to you in your 30s. I hope that you're telling that same story when you're in your 60s, right?
Yes.
Maybe even into your 70s, so that you can say, hey, I fell, but I got up. I'm not made of glass. I didn't fracture anything. I have muscular and bone integrity. And of course, my nervous system still works.
Yes. Very important stuff here. Okay, so to finish up, I want to just run through, and then you can jump in when I'm done with this list, Dr. G, with some important strength patterns, just to give listeners a takeaway here for them to work on. So grip. You and I know grip is a major indicator for overall health in people. I recommend having your grip tested to see where you stand with that. Statistic here, this says in a study of Americans ages 20 to 34, occupational therapists found that men younger than 30 have significantly weaker hand grips than their counterparts in 1985 did. So our grips are getting weaker. We sit at desks all day. We type. We're not like pounding fence posts and holding chainsaws like the general population. We used to be farmers. We had very strong grips our whole lifetime. Like I know there's a guy, I know many 70 to 80-year-olds that were hard, like loggers, farmers. And when they shake your hand still, they would crush most high schoolers' grip for sure. Like I'm not like, I'd put money on it just because they have a strong grip. So grip is very, very important. Hanging from a bar daily, traction on the spine, building strength and resiliency in the ligaments and tendons in the shoulder joint. there was a really nice article wrote by Dr. John Krisch, Krisch, for people listening. He was an orthopedic surgeon. You've probably seen this, Dr. G. He did years and years and years of shoulder surgery. And then at the end of his career, he started really looking into the benefits of hanging and, shoulder health. And what he had found was really, quite staggering. So for people that want to look into that, I would start hanging. The deadlift, learning to hinge correctly. A lot of people blow their backs out and hurt themselves because they don't have strong spinal erectors. Deadlifting correctly is a huge way to help prevent that. Balance, we know as we age, our balance goes, down the tubes. We see it here in our facility. We see it with kids that don't play outside. That's really sad. So in 2017, there was a Duke University study done. They took 775 women and men, and they had them stand on one leg for 60 seconds without support. And what they found was very interesting. People in their 30s stayed upright by an average of 57 seconds. In their 40s, it was down to 52 seconds. 50s, it was down to 44. 60s was 40 seconds, and 70s was 27 seconds. Okay. So the point of this, other than the obvious being that balance decreases with time, was that when do we fall and critically hurt ourselves? 70s, 80s. And so there's a link there. And your balance doesn't need to decrease with age. It decreases because you're not training it. So these statistics prove the point, that if you don't train it, it's going to get worse with time. So the next movement is a farmer's carry. So carrying weighted objects. You and I are both huge fans of weighted carries, whether it's dumbbells, kettlebells, rucking, which is walking with weight on your body with a vest. You and I could do a whole separate podcast on the benefits of that. But again, for the purpose of this conversation, those are very important. Squatting. AARP magazine voted the squat is the #1 exercise to maintain as we age. And you had said, like, sitting to the toilet, getting in and out of bed. I can't tell you the number of people, including kids, that can't squat full, like ass to grass. They just lost the mobility and the strength in their hips and their legs. The Turkish get up, a unique exercise that a lot of coaches don't coach because they don't understand the movement themselves. But a Turkish get up, in my opinion, could be quite possibly one of, if not the most important exercise, is one of the most important. Basically, it's where someone's laying on their back on the ground. They roll to their elbow to one side or the other. They get up to their knees. They do a reverse lunge. They stand, and then they reverse the movement back down. We have clients do this with a cup half filled with water, so there's no weight. But if you perform the movement incorrectly, which most people do at first, you get wet. It's better than dropping a 15-pound dumbbell on your face. And so for people listening, again, Turkish get up with a cup half filled with water. Do your right arm and left arm. The lunge is very important for unilateral leg pushing. This really shows a lot of imbalances. We're amazed at the number of people that can do, let's say, their right leg, 10 reps, no problem. Left leg, there are some people that will fall, not literally face plant, but they will drop to their knee. They've lost all the strength in that opposite limb because they don't use it. And then lastly, are any movements that require upper body pulling. Okay, so think about squeezing your shoulder blade. So this could be like a ring row, a barbell row, a chin up. These would be your postural muscles. A lot of fitness enthusiasts and gym rats work on pushing movements for their pecs, abs, whatnot. Very few people work on their postural muscles. We call it having a six-pack on the back. You want to shoot for that. The stronger the back is, the stronger the human is going to be. So do you want to add anything, whether it's to the list of exercises or comment on any of those, Dr. G?
Yeah. From a neurological perspective, how your brain is organized, we have stabilizing muscles and spurt muscles, right? So the spurt muscles, if you just imagine throwing a ball like a, baseball. The spurt muscles are the muscles that would give you the power to actually launch the ball forward to throw it, right? So that would be your pecs, your anterior shoulder, and you're taking that and you're just launching the ball like this, right? So you throw the ball. So what's happening? You're taking this lever, right, your shoulder, and you're throwing it out in front of you. And when you do that, there's a moment of dislocation, right? So, if there was nothing behind you, you would launch forward and your shoulder would just dislocate, right? If you can imagine that. But what happens is when I throw the ball, the spurt explosive activity is stabilized by the muscles behind me. Those are the stabilizers. So this holds true with every movement, right? If I'm going to do a curl, this is an explosive muscle. The muscle is going to contract to bring the weight up. Now, this bone here wants to dislocate, but it won't because my tricep is the stabilizer. So stabilizers need endurance, whereas the spurt muscles need strength. So when I work on the stabilizers, those are all of the spinal erectors, those are the triceps, those are the posterior or the shoulder muscles behind you. I'm less concerned with their strength as I'm concerned with their endurance. So if I'm going to throw a baseball 100 times in a game and I'm super strong, but I got bad stabilization, I'm going to cause a shoulder injury after, 90 throws, right? So I want to make sure that I'm not necessarily trying to become super strong in the muscles behind me. I might take a cable and just do kind of like pulling a sword out movement so that behind me, those muscles have endurance and the stability to keep my muscles and to keep my joints and my ligaments safe while I'm doing a strength type of movement. So if you could imagine what are the stabilizers, if you're doing a deadlift, what's stabilizing you is not just your spinal erectors, but your pelvic floor, like your lower abdominal and your pelvic muscles are stabilizing you while you do this kind of explosive activity. So I would say understand the spurt muscles and understand the stabilizers. And when you're designing a program, work on the speed and strength of the spurt and work on the stabilization and endurance of the stabilizers.
Yeah, that's a great point. And a proper program would have both of those, in there. Cool. Well, this has been great. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up, Dr. G?
Yeah, I mean, one thing we didn't touch upon is the cross crawl reflex that we all have when we're born, right? Yeah. Where, all infants are not taught, they naturally will, kind of this arm goes up and then the opposite leg goes up, right? So this cross crawl pattern is something that can be lost in children with developmental disabilities. Sometimes they never develop to begin with. So one of the things that we can do is just kind of work on that cross crawl pattern. But as we get older, we tend to start losing that cross crawl pattern. So when you watch somebody walk, if you don't see the opposite arm and leg swinging the way it should, just imagine if you're running to catch a baseball, right? Which leg are you going to stand? I'm left-handed. So if I have the mitt in my, in my right arm and I'm going to go and catch the ball, my right arm is going to go up, my left leg is going to go up, and my head's going to turn in that direction. That entire thing is neurologically ingrained in us, and we can lose that. So it's also good to reinforce that cross-crawl reflex as you get older, because that contributes to the neurological integrity that we were talking about. So doing things, marching types of movements where, your opposite arm and leg are swinging. And we kind of do this with people who are either aging or suffering from concussion or whatever the case might be. And you watch them walk and their arms don't swing, or their left arm will swing just fine. Their right arm just kind of stays at their side while they're walking. That's neurological disintegration that needs to be addressed, because that's going to result in a bigger problem later. So again, I always try to bring the nervous system into this. And with that comes the nervous system's ability to communicate with the environment and your body, and anything that would interfere with that needs to be addressed, so that goes to my training as a chiropractor, that my training in understanding that neurological integrity is a primary concern that we should always be addressing, no matter what our goals are.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I call that cross symmetry training. So for people listening, you can think about like doing a bear crawl, or like a lizard crawl, if you look that up on YouTube, or like lizard push-ups. There's a drill here. We do a lot of work, depending on the clientele, but like with a tennis ball or a lacrosse ball. So I have them dribble the ball one time with their right hand, and then with their left foot, and then their left hand, and then their right foot. And they alternate that pattern. And how do you dribble a ball with your foot? It's not hard, right? You just strike down upon it. You can get it quite quickly. But that cross symmetry with limbs, left to right, right to left, very, very hard for people. Another drill that we do is I'll drop a tennis ball, and as I drop it, I give the command of right arm or left arm. And so they're moving all around the room, and I'll drop it. They have one bounce to catch it. So I drop it, and right arm, boom, left, boom, left, boom, left, boom, right. And we go so on and so forth. There's another one where we hold a PVC stick on end, the end touching the ground, and I just simply drop it. And they have to lunge forward with opposite legs. This is very hard for people that have a one leg that doesn't react the same. And then they have to catch the stick as low to the ground as possible. So there's so many of these things that there's a move called, if you look up on our YouTube channel, called a starfish, where they have to lay, did I have you do this? I can't remember. They lay on their back with all four limbs touching the ground, and then they have to go from their back to their stomach without lifting either hand or either foot off the ground. Now, Dr. G, you're laughing because most people, athlete or not, they roll over like a board, like boom, like their hands come off, they're like stiff. But then if you see someone like me do it, or someone that knows how to do it, they're fluid and they move around their hands and around their feet. And any age can do this. You could be 100, like any age could do a starfish. But neurologically, we have locked up so much that the drills that I'm describing are so comical and foreign to people. Juggling is a really good thing. 3 balls, learning to juggle. 2 or 3 years ago, I took that on as a project of mine. I could not juggle, couldn't even come close to juggling. I could barely just do 2 balls. Now I can juggle 3 balls as long as I want in an air squat. But I taught myself that. It sounds complicated. It's not. It took me about 3 months of actual practice and I got it. So I think that's a great point, or a good place for us to stop. I think we've given a lot of content with physical movement assessment and the benefits of strength training. So thank you, Dr. G. I want to wrap this up with saying that this is the final part of our Live 100 series with you, Dr. G. In our prior 2 conversations, we discussed, for people that didn't catch these episodes, VO2 max testing, body composition and blood work. And then today we talked about strength training and physical movement assessment. So if you haven't found the prior 2 episodes, go find those. They're amazing. We're going to be uploading them to our website. So basically, in my opinion, and I think yours, that when you combine these 5 pillars, it's without a doubt the most effective and powerful way to train and to get healthy and be optimized. You need all 5. And so with our Live 100 program, like you and I have discussed, we're going to be doing a soft launch in the fall of 2024. You're a part of that team, which we're really looking forward to. And we're going to really dive in deep with clients. And I can guarantee you there's going to be some dramatic changes in many lives. And so to finish up, Dr. G, how can listeners learn more about you and all the great work that you're doing?
Just follow me on any platform at Dr. Stephen G, DrSteveng. My website is drsteveng.com, but everything, X and YouTube and Instagram and Facebook, it's all at Dr. Stephen G. And I would say I'm probably most active sharing all of my, kind of do my mental download on Instagram the most. And of course, YouTube, we get into a little bit more of a long form conversation like this one. The videos tend to be 8 to 12 minutes long on a certain topic. So that's the best place to find me and, kind of see where I'm speaking next or what podcast I, will be on. If you like that information, we plan to continue putting out a lot of content.
Awesome. Well, Dr. G, thank you. We will put those links in the show notes, and we'll talk to you soon.
Perfect. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting our sponsors, Native Path Supplements, Lombardi Chiropractic, and A Dog's Day Out Doggy Daycare. They help us bring you 2 new episodes each month and have a special discount just for our listeners. See the show notes for more details. Thank you, and see you next time on the Co-Movement Gym podcast.